Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I have got a recommendation list. I've got 5 books to recommend if you are into vampires. These books I think are a good mix of classic and modern, and I've been really enjoying vampires lately, and I've been reading more vampire books than I was kind of planning. But if you're like me and really into vampires and vampire lore and that type of stuff, then these are 5 books I think you'd really like. So, not in any particular order, I'm already kind of breaking the rules a little bit by recommending a series. So I've got Death Masks here by Jim Butcher. I'm not necessarily recommending this book, but I am recommending the series. This is book 5. The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. This is a modern kind of noir detective paranormal fantasy series. It's very popular on Book Talk and BookTube and things like that. It currently has 17 books, and I think it's going to be 25 books. It's going to be over 20 books. I forget exactly how many. Anyway, I'm reading this. I'm just about done this one. This series follows wizard detective Harry Dresden, who lives in Chicago and kind of is a private investigator, helps out the Chicago PD if there's cases that they can't really explain. So with this series, you don't just get vampires, you get a lot of things. You get vampires, you get werewolves, you get demons, you get ghosts, you get, fairies and witches and all that type of stuff. Specifically, I'm only 5 books in. My favorite book so far has been book 3, which is Grave Peril, which I think is also one of the best vampire books in the series. But vampires make themselves known in the series pretty much from book 1 or 2. So if you're looking for vampires and a really quick, easy read, like these, most of them take place over the course of a couple of days, and you can pretty much keep pace with that. You can read them in a couple of days. I would highly, highly recommend the Dresden Files. Next on the list is kind of a classic, and you might have heard of the book, you might have seen the movie, although the movie's very different, and that's I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. So this is kind of a classic last man on earth story. It follows, I forget the main character's name right now, that's unprofessional, Robert Neville. It follows Robert Neville, who kind of lives on his own after some sort of strange pandemic has taken over the planet, and the world is now full of vampires. So during the day, he kind of goes about his life, making little repairs to his house, fixing all the boarded up windows and all that stuff. And during night, he just tries to ignore the sounds outside and the taunting of the vampires who are now after him specifically. And yeah, it's a really good horror novel, but it's really philosophical. Its prose is really beautiful. It very much so is about loneliness and kind of what that does to a person. This is a really good look, not just at vampires and horror, but at grief and loneliness and isolation. So if you're looking for a quick vampire novel still, it's only about 170 pages, but with a bit more kind of philosophical and thematic meat, definitely this is a great recommendation, I think. Next, a book that was apparently quite inspired, or at least the author was inspired by Richard Matheson, is Salems Law by Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King as a kid, but I never read this one. And then I finally picked it up, I think last year, and I loved it. I was shocked at how much I loved it. I think this is the book that also really kind of showed me how great a technical writer King is. Even if he's not my favorite author, and there's not that many more books of his that I really want to get into, I was really impressed with this one in its prose, in the horror, and in some of the real emotion. Like this, it's scary, it's creative in its structure and its prose, but it's really it's quite emotional at times. It really hits you in the heart at times. So yeah, this one follows Ben Mears is his name, coming back to his childhood town, of Salem's Law, short for Jerusalem's Law, and a very Dracula-esque figure. Essentially, a vampire has come into the town and is slowly, methodically just going about changing the town into vampires. And so it's a really ominous story. Like the horror is quite ominous and foreboding at times, but then because it's King, it's also quite in your face at times and gruesome. Yeah, it's a really good kind of classic vampire story. It feels like, like I Am Legend is a bit more experimental. It's a bit more about certain themes of grief and things like that. This feels like a kind of Dracula for the New Age, right? I mean, New Age, it was written in the 70s, but it feels very much like a modern, kind of retelling almost, or reinterpretation of a Dracula. So this is one of the absolute classics if you're looking for vampires. And then this was another one of my favorite books last year, and this is The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. This is a really cool kind of historical fantasy that takes place in 19th century Prague. And it's about these, what are they called? The Lamplighters. It's about these this kind of mysterious secret order called the Lamplighters, who essentially go out lighting all the old gas lamps of Prague, but also kind of fighting off any evil forces that might be harassing the people of Prague. So it follows Domek. Yes, Domek is the main character. It's been a while since I've read this, but he is a lamplighter. He is kind of a very simple, good-hearted, hard-working, but kind of black and white protagonist. And it follows him not only fighting off vampires and other creatures, but also his kind of romance with this woman, I forget her name, Lady Ora Fisherova, who has kind of her secrets of her own, and I can't spoil anything else, but yeah, this is a really great book. It's really great in terms of its atmosphere. Nicole Jarvis definitely, clearly did her research on 19th century Prague. It feels, the atmosphere feels so, I don't know if it's just what she's giving that time period, but the atmosphere lends itself so perfectly to a vampire story. The characters are quite fun, and you really connect to them. And yeah, it's also kind of a sexy book. It's really fun. This is a really great book. I think it was her first book, so I'm really excited to see what else Nicole Jarvis puts out, because if this was her first book, I'm pretty certain. What an outstanding debut. So I'm really excited to see what else Nicole Jarvis does. And if you're into kind of historical fiction, vampires, bit of romance, this is a great one to check out. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is my fancy edition that has a cover on it that does not show well on camera. But this is the classic. This is, I think it was published 1897. So this is the oldest of the bunch by a good few decades. And yeah, this is arguably where it all started, right? Bram Stoker's classic. This follows Jonathan Harker, who is a solicitor, and he is sent to Transylvania to help the mysterious Count Dracula with the project of kind of purchasing an estate in London and just seeing that all the paperwork for travel and finance and all that stuff are okay. And Jonathan Harker is quickly kind of swept up in this eerie, mysterious castle where he realizes everything is not okay and not what he thought it was. Yeah, and it's a very classic story that, there's so many movies, but I also, the book does it so well that I don't want to spoil anything else. But yeah, so this book, I thought, because of its age, the horror and the kind of prose or any of those things might not hold up to a modern reader, to kind of modern sensibilities. And I'm really surprised it really does. It is spooky, it is eerie, it is emotional, and the prose is really not only beautiful, but structurally it's really creative and well done, because it's an epistolary book. So it's written entirely in kind of clippings, right? So it's excerpts of people's journals and diaries, it's letters between people, it's clippings of newspapers. It's only the second book I've ever read using that format, which the first one was Stephen King's first book, Carrie. And yeah, it works so well for this, and it makes me want to read more classics, because I think this kind of broke the dam of like hesitation a little bit because of how accessible, and I think how well it holds up. So yeah, absolute classic. And kind of like Frankenstein or things like that, the Universal horror movies kind of don't really do it justice. What's it called? Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, that movie. I think it has its issues and it's a bit cheesy, but it's really quite accurate in terms of structure and plot and style. So yeah, I highly recommend that movie, and I really, really recommend this book. You can't go wrong with the absolute classic. So those are my 5 vampire recommendations. Let me know if you have any other vampire recommendations. I've really been enjoying reading about vampires lately, so I would love to hear your recommendations and let me know your thoughts on these. And I hope you're all having a great spooky season. Thanks for checking in. I'll be back soon.